Looks like we were able to re-establish that line with Dr. Siphamandla Zondi. Dr. Zondi, I was just asking you that, it's undeniable that the world order is shifting and the geopolitical climate is far more tense now than in recent years. But you're also calling for a review of South Africa's foreign policy. Tell us more about that.
Yes, good evening and good evening to your viewers. The Planning Commission had conducted a study, a scoping study, not a very deep study, but looking at the approach that South Africa has towards hosting major events and chairing major global platform, and that has implications for how we conduct foreign policy. The study finds that the position that the National Development Plan had in regard to how South Africa must conduct its foreign policy is still a correct one. That is, the South African foreign policy must focus as much on political diplomacy as it should on economic diplomacy. And it must do that, among other ways, by harnessing strong political relations for economic benefits, even in difficult geopolitical climate. In 2008, it was a very difficult geopolitical climate with the global financial crisis. And there have been many moments since then to now. And so the current geopolitical climate are not new for us. But what we know needed to be done in the past must be done also now, in this difficult one, is that you must establish as many economic partnerships in the world as it is possible. So they are not dependent on any one particular region or the other, but you spread your economic relations right through the world. Political relations right through the world are okay, but they are a basis for also building international economic cooperation. On that basis, we will be able to prosecute our non-aligned position on global tensions and conflict and all that. We're on the basis of having entrenched economic diplomacy everywhere. And that's what South Africa needs to continue to work for. It's not a suggestion from us, but it's a country's plan adopted by Parliament via a majority vote in 2012, the National Development Plan. It must be implemented, even in this area of international relations, with earnest, with great energy, and must be done to the letter.
And speaking about the NDP as well, you're mentioning that the approach is still correct in focusing on political diplomacy, but also focusing on the economy as well. When one looks at, for instance, what's going on with the re-election of US President Donald Trump, the political diplomacy of the land issue in South Africa is quite the hot potato that the state obviously needs to do something about. Now, when the state did try and implement new amendments to the Expropriation Act, we saw retaliation from, for instance, the US government, and the retaliation came in the form of economic for lack of a better word, punishment, when we think about the tariffs as well that were imposed on South Africa, and some of the harsh words that came out of that US administration when it came to our own political diplomacy and trying to rehash our own things. How do you then suggest, Dr. Zondi, that we balance that fine line in this current climate with a president like US President Donald Trump at the helm?
Yes, I mean, the US president is pretty much a typical president of many countries, which is he's looking after the interests of its own countries. And in the process, he must be harming us. In the process, he must be harming global governance and global multilateralism. All we need to do is, in return, look after our interests and find the most optimal way to negotiate a deal with the United States. And they are in a moment where they are looking for countries to come and propose deals and negotiate deals. And that's what economic diplomacy is about. It's about finding interest, common interest, and disagree where the interests are not working. Whatever will happen in the end, this matter will be resolved via negotiations, and those negotiations be principally economic rather than political. The political will create a condition, or the political will always be somewhere there, but the deal that Trump is looking for is an economic deal. So we should already be thinking very carefully, what do we have to offer to the United States and what do we want from the United States in terms of trade and investment, and see if we can come to a meeting point at some point and find that deal, and then discuss all this misinformation and misconception about South Africa. But we can't focus just on this misconception and all that, because it's a question of you think this, I think this. We can never resolve it. And we come to a deal somewhere so that our interests are interpaired, our interests are overlapping. And on that basis, then build up the political relations again. But it is the NDP that requires us to do everything that we can do to help the country achieve 5% of GDP growth, and thus reduce unemployment and grow the livelihood among people, improve the lives of the people. We need a foreign policy that can address the lives of the people on the ground practically, while at the same time tackling very strategically and tactfully the political difficulties and questions that we have, not just with the United States, we also have political difficulties with other parts of the world, including the EU and everywhere else.
And as well as the National Planning Commission, you have called for the re-establishment of the decommissioned South African Council on International Relations. Now, this had been launched back in 2015. Explain to us its key roles and why you're calling for its re-establishment.
The National Development Plan advises that government must strengthen its strategic research and policy capacity. As you know, international cooperation this time require you to have all the data you need in order to negotiate. It could be data about the actual trade interest, changing economic conditions in different countries, and how you need to adjust yourself to that. So it's a very scientific area of public policy, and it required that we should strengthen that research capacity, strengthen that strategic capacity and all that. And that was going to happen within government, but also through agencies such as the Council on International Relations, which brought together diplomats within government, public officials, think tanks, researchers, and other experts to work together to develop positions that South Africa should take in various platforms in the world across the length and breadth of our foreign policy. So this advisory body was going to be a useful mechanism in times like this for South Africa to think about what they would do when we are sandwiched between the East and the West. What do we do when we are facing the repercussions of the trade war between China and the United States? What do we do with the EU that is now scrambling for partnerships because of its difficulty with the United States? We need to be thinking very carefully so that nobody runs us for a ride, but we are very careful about what we're giving and what we're taking. And that can be done within government, it can be done by practitioners, but it needs people who sit back and think and analyze and develop scenarios. And that council was very useful to do that. It was established after a careful process of consultation and discussion, but it was folded, unfortunately, without any form of discussion and no explanation. But the country needed something like that. All countries our size have something of a similar nature. We need it, and we need it very urgently.
And just, Dr. Zondi, finally and very briefly, so you're also saying that Parliament needs to assist the government when it comes to being more strategic about these international engagements. And as we know, Parliament is made up of different political parties with different ideologies who often don't agree on policy, especially when it comes to international relations. When one looks at the DA and ANC, for instance, and their different stances when it comes to the Middle East. So wouldn't that just muddy the process when you have different cooks in the kitchen, each trying to make a different meal?
We are very fortunate this time that for the first time since now after 2012, we have a common plan voted for by all political parties. There is no party that is opposed to the NDP, even 12 years later, which is very, very good for us. Now, all oversight that is done in Parliament is not done on the basis of your individual position. It is about what has been decided that you as government must implement, are you implementing it? So we are asking that Parliament must hold government to account in relation to implementing a national development plan that was adopted by Parliament and accepted by government. And that's all that needs to be done. There's no division of views in relation to that. And therefore, it is a low-hanging fruit for us. Let's get oversight about implementation of the NDP in relation to international relations and cooperation tightened up, strengthened, but it must also be constructive and help the country to achieve the goals it needs to achieve, and achieve now before 2030.
Dr. Zondi, really appreciate your time this evening.